Okay, this is The Defeated Life by Elizabeth Oak Smith. Upon the shores of Casco Bay, about 10 miles from the city of Portland, is a long hilly range of perhaps 3/4 of a mile in length, a bare and rocky spot partially covered with stinted pines. In one part where the gray granite crops out from the thin soil may be seen a weather-beaten vein, which a few inhabitants of the district have elevated upon a rude frame and soldered into the rock, in the pious hope thus preserving this only relic of the meeting house below the ledge. Rarely might be found a more attractive spot for the worship of the new people than the site of this old church, standing as it did as the base of the ledge before named, upon a green esplanade flanked upon every side by the forest, through the openings of which arose the blockhouse and the place of refuge of the cutters. It was pulled down in 1830, if I mistake not, having been long deserted as a place of prayer. Yet it was in excellent preservation up to the time of its fall, having been built of white oak. I cannot even think of this desecration without a pang. I remember the awe with which I once trod alone in this deserted aisle. The quaint pulpit with its antique oaken carvings, and the communion table, folded in its place, and covered with dust, from which its elements had been distributed to the pious and believing, now no more. The crypt beneath the pulpit, in which had been kept the rude communion service, then the doors ajar, or slipped from their hinges, and the seats were pressed by the young and the beautiful, the solemn galleries, the place for singers, the slender balustrade surmounting each pew, which left their tracency where the light fell through the small glass. I remember the sparrow and the swallow, which found their peaceful habitations, the whispered murmur of the pines as the wind swept adorn the ledge and stole through the lone church, and the bleat of the sheep sheltered beneath its caves. Truly, I know not how human hands could have raised it. I know not what heart would not have been awed in remorse and grief, as the vulnerable rafters, so long audible to prayer and praise, were crushed to the earth. We have no ruins, and it may never be shall have, for the spirit of our people is opposed to associations of the kind. They reject the past, whether in experience, in sentiment, or architecture. A cobweb is monstrous to them, a cornice honored by dust and made sacred by the swallow. In its offense, the gray beautiful tintings of time are unseemly, and they long for the tidy painted walls and the brisk whitewash. Oh, had they but spared the old meeting house below the ledge! Thither they might have brought their children, and have told them tales of blood and peril. Have taught them here the sublime lessons of human freedom and the more sublime lessons of order and good citizenship. Reverently pacing those old aisles, how impressive might have become the teachings of wisdom, how the bygone age had lived again. What though the birds sang above the sounding boards? Was it not a sweet harmony? What though the fox may pat upon the stairs and look forth from the windows? Would it not be send solemn and earnest thought home to the heart? What though the vestibule become a fold of the sheep? Is not Jesus called the Lamb of God? And would not the meek innocent natures appeal for like of in our own? What though the green moss lay in tufts upon the roof, and the grass nodded from the caves, and the turf rolled itself like the fold on the tilted steps? Yet most pleasantly had come down in the Sabbath sun to light each with smile old men, too infirm of the church going, or it may be yearning too much over the past, would have been loitered about the doorway, or leaning in heavenly upon their church, have walked along the aisles with ears too deaf to be startled by the sepulchral echoes. Oh, that plea might have heard of the old meeting house in which our fathers worshipped, in times when each went to arm to the house of God, lest the savage should find it unprepared for the defense, when the worship was a great human need to be sought through peril and death, and not as now a luxury, an appendage to responsibility. Chapter 2. 'Tis a now world no more to maid, warrior or bard is a homage paid. The bay tree's laurel, myrtle's shade, men's though resign, heaven placed us here to vote and trade, twins task divine. Halleck. The site of the old meeting house is now a smooth green turf, and the only grasshopper and the cricket pipe a Sabbath day song to God. The road skirting the hill is overgrown with bushes and pines under the shelter of the Gilman Rock. Those dear cool pines, which kept up such a whispering all day, it seemed as if they were telling over what the lovers had said beneath them, and trying to sigh in the same style. Those old pines, so hard and smooth underneath, where no reptiles ever came and no bushes crowded themselves, and only the winter green came up to show off its red berries, and the Indian pipe, so wax-like in its purity, as if once thought to be a columbine, but found itself out of place, and grew pale and tenderly beautiful, like a pure heart breaking. Those social, talkative pines are all deserted now. You can still see the road, and a rough one it must have been, adown which every Sunday morning might have seen the Brewster family on their way to church. There was Mr. Brewster, a short, stout man, with a fresh, good-natured face, whose ruffles and velvet gave him an appearance of an overgrown boy, and who bestrode a large, sleek chestnut horse with the air of a clumsy master upon the nursery hobby. Behind him, a staley in lace and brocade, perched daintily upon a pillion, her fair but haughty head rising above him, sat Madame Brewster, her shapely figure almost courtly and careless, yet proud bearing. One hand, which slightly pressed his waist, allowed the many rows of lace to fall back of his few substances of interest in what passed before him, for cold and fever had laid her quietly down to her long sleep. Strange as the night seemed, Mr. Malcolm nearly disappeared from church and places of public resort, and seemed more shy and more taciturn than ever. Lizzie, too, her existence was well nigh forgotten. People were absorbed in the stirring events of the time, and the old low house, so silent, so hushed, so solitary from year to year, was rarely a subject of thought. Speculation was sometimes afloat in respecting the inmates, but no one presumed to interfere with what seemed to be matters so entirely belonging to themselves. Besides, Madame Brewster was well known to regard her daughter with a strange severity, and few were willing to face the rebuke of her proud eyes and withering tongue. For a while Lizzie might have been seen at a pew Mr. Malcolm of a Sabbath morning, and then the worshippers, who did not fail to scrutinize her, observed that her figure was more slight than formerly, and a touching waviness approached her stoop gave her a peculiar tenderness in her air. The little fingers which pressed the psalm book were very fair and slender, and the blue veins of the wrist may have been traced through the transparent skin. As she passed her father's pew, she exchanged gentle greetings, rather reserved and timid, it was thought, with her mother, but Charles Edwards she would kiss, and then pass on, nor lift her eyes to many who longed for a glance from her sweet face. At length she disappeared altogether, and was rumored Lizzie was in effect a prisoner in her own house. A melancholy look had the house indeed. Enormous elms, which should have tossed their long branches forth to the light, had drooped themselves around the roof of the lone dwelling in the commonplace, did not fail to recall the superstition that grief to its inmates indicted thereby. They remembered that the first blessed day of spring, which should have called gladness among the young bride's home, beheld an owl brooding upon the roof. Then came the swallows to build a nest in the eaves ad in the stones of the cold chimney. A sad aspect did the mansion wear when its clustering elms and singing birds and all else so hushed. Rarely was the lady seen among the premises, or if by chance a passer-by caught a glimpse of her amid the abundant shrubbery of the old grounds, or through the open casement, her look of intense sadness, her sweet, unchanged, melancholy beauty affected him like something supernatural. Why did she thus hold herself apart from human sympathy? Surely those round eyes, sweet lips, those deep, loving eyes, and that low-toned, gentle voice beckon all that is best and dearest in the affluence of womanhood. We must add 10 years more to the 10 already past, during which Lizzie had scarcely crossed the threshold. No one knew why it was so, although in a general dislike existed with regard to Mr. Malcolm. No one believed that a being so ardent, so full of life and thought as Lizzie Brewster had been in girlhood, would thus voluntarily immerse herself in any way from all the genialities of life. At length, one morning, an old servant of the family hobbled over to the Brewster home, a distance and some miles, requesting the immediate attendance of Madame Brewster. Did Mr. or Mrs. Malcolm send? No, Mrs. Malcolm doesn't stir from the sofa, and Mr. Malcolm won't speak to nobody. The proud woman's heart sank within her. On reaching the house, Mr. Malcolm wasted to a mere shadow and was found seated in a large chair in the center of the room, with small pinky blue eyes intently fixed on the form of Lizzie, which was curled up, enveloped in masses of drapery upon one end of the sofa, her head resting upon her arms and her eyes closed. "Why do you not speak to her?" cried Madame Brewster, shaking his arm violently and dreading herself to approach her child. Mr. Malcolm, without moving his eyes, answered maniacally, "She will not let me." "Go to her. Speak to her. Man, what are you afraid of?" said the stern woman once more. "I dare not," was the reply, and nothing was left but another to solve the terrible mystery, for indeed she seemed as one dead. Lizzie unclosed her eyes, but they were listless, as she seemed unconscious of all that passed before her. When she was borne away to her chamber, Malcolm followed with his eyes, cold and pale, fixed upon her face. Some simple chords restored to her partial degree of vigor, and she became aware of his presence. Raising herself up with an energy to which she seemed a point before totally unequaled, she pointed her thin hand towards him. "Take that man from my presence, and, mother, if you hope for peace in your dying hour, let me die without those hateful eyes upon my face." "Oh, God, for what I have lived!" she cried, sinking backwards into the pillow. A few days closed the scene, and Madame Brewster, stung to the heart, stricken with remorse, and her proud intellect humbled that she was so little comprehended a creature whose existence, but for her, might have been one of love and life-imparting happiness, returned to her dwelling to mourn over that which she could never be recalled. As the direction of Elizabeth, she took from beneath an old chest some sheets of paper, upon which she had inscribed some faint records of her sad life, which the mother read, and never from that time was known to smile. Sunday, the rain pours in torrents, and the terrible wind roars through the old house. The sounds which others often like to hear fill me with the saddest emotions. I was east forth from the home roof in such a night. No wonder all the people have regarded a stormy bridal and the ominous of evil. The fates, even the merriful fates, shrieking as if there were disapproval. A lowery day and the lowery bride. I remember hearing someone quote upon that day so fearful to me. I will reproach no one. I must be a blessed thing for a child to feel itself understood, its nature caved for, loved. I wonder if I am unlike others, or if so, the worse for the unlikeliness. Well, let it pass. I shall never know. I dare say people get tired of loving each other. Even my father and my brother seem to forgive my existence. I will write about it, or I shall weep myself blind. Oh, upon the grief of pain oppressed in the lone chambers of my moan, no hope for the sympathizing breast, I will weary soon. Love for the gay and careless heart, but not for his blessed boon. In sight of the tears he will depart, weary full soon. Upon the head of ground may rise the shield thee from the forenoon, but ere the crimson twilight slides, 'twill wither soon. To knot thee the stricken vine, to stretch my tendrils yearning one, the Prop thy weakness, wood and twine will weary soon. Take not the cup, though faint a soul, which the human ministry doth own, for all aside the drops will roll and mock thee soon. Seek thou the barren rock for rest, pillow thy head upon a stone, 'twere better than a human breast weary so soon. Friday, how I have lived in illusions, how by the creature of thy own soul I have lived in a world by myself, and how the blue sky, the hushed stars have sunk like a great beautiful story into my spirit. How the blossoms, all that taste could summon in this new country to help out these illusions. How like a nun I have lived, and how little do I know of what is beyond these walls. Dolly says she hears there is a war and the great trials of the rebellions in this country, yet I know nothing of these things. Why have I lived? And yet now I can escape his presence, and I am not unhappy. Yet I am feeble and may die soon. And then, oh God, he will come. His eyes will be upon me. His presence weigh on like a cloud upon me. I shall go mad. No, I will pray God to spare me the most terrible of all calamities. I will reword the past, and that I may be sure that all is right with me. Monday, I have been looking in the glass to see what tricks time has played on me. Sooth they say must have been strangely kindly. I am pale, but not in the line has been traced. My hair falls like a banner over the marble capitol. Truly is the most abundance, thanks to good Dolly, who devotes herself to all that concerns me. This morning, when the faithful begin to sat down to dress it, I laid my head against her kind old heart, and wept like a very child. I do not know why I should weep, for I, who has never known happiness, accepting as God has poured it into my soul, throughout thought and truth, surely why should I weep that the scene is drawn to a close? Yet so it is. Poor old Dolly, she did not try to comfort me. She only laid her shriveled hand upon my head and whispered, "Bless the dear lamb." I feel I shall dissolve in tears, but my life had been a blank. Like a child I have lived. Years have passed over me, yet I am still a child. I feel the stirrings of great and beautiful thought within me, but alas, I know not how others in this great world are to be stirred, and these things may but be the humors of blood lifting through the activity. Thought which had been as nothing of my life had been of action. Tuesday, my nerves must be strangely attenuated. I hear that the slightest sound. My sight is so distinct that I see through the lids, and the perfume of the flowers which Dolly bring me affects me to faintness, all but the rose, that the loveliest of flowers, which has an odor so fresh of the elements, smells so sweet that I can bear it always. It is to the senses that the beauty is of the soul, and I begin to awake the sense of what I am and what I might have been. O God, spare me the sight. I cannot bear it now. Too late, for the material word of the bonds are wasted to the thread which bind me here. I feel if buoyed and the wings of the angels, as if now their pure forms were defined in the thin air. I hear pleasant voices of the garden of the soul. I tremble not to which ways. Where art thou? I am not here, a child even now. I am glad to see that I have but a small space left me and my thoughts to grow too mighty for this prison house. The great fighting, trafficking, and hard world is too terrible a world for me to encounter. I will e'en try to dream again. I will put by the stirrings of the spirit, and truly it is not meet for me. I will read that which is prompted me to write last night. Despair. There's a lake which sullen wave reflects in the image of its breast. No flitting bird of wing doth have, no bosom on its margin rest, but silence solemn and profound broods of the solitary shore, and crumbling ruins strewed around to tell those who come return no more. And thus my bosom hushed to rest shall break no more its deepen like sleep, with dreams protrude no more oppressed. I wake no more to watch them weep, my perished hopes revive no more, hushed and for I my trembling fears. Faith points no promise from the shore. I have nothing to do with tears. Ah, wherefore are these sullen lake? Must I my lightsome banner fling? Why on its stagnant pulse awake, where my dead kneels around me ring? My frightened baroque goes sullen down, scaled up mine wealth is there. One fistful gleams on the moment thrown, and then sinks in silence and despair. Alas, it is not well to write in this wise, yet I thank God, who has given me more strength to endure than things like these may have imply. It must be that, like a poet utters his complaint, he does not so because he has a strength beyond. He permits to his heart to blood, as it were, because he hath no great strong heart, with which is ease thereby. There was little more than this, the lifelong record. It would appear having been destroyed rather than it desecrated by its action of its uncongenial eyes. And thus, unknown to the unministered to, in silence and in grief, lived and died one of God's blessed messengers for good, a sweet bird of song which might have soared to its very gates of heaven, but mewed in the owl's nest, grew fearful of its own voice, and thus expired. The end. That was The Defeated Life, narrated by Summer Simonak, for one-woman writer Elizabeth Oath Smith, class by Dr. Scherman at Northeastern Illinois University. I do apologize for some of my verbal errors because I did print out a copy that was very hard to read at some spots, so it was a little difficult. Thank you for bearing with me, and I hope you enjoy listening to me read. The end.